The promoter blamed a scheduling glitch. A station said the feed failed. Phones rang. No one answered. In the dark between excuses, a legend stood very still. At 56, Ice Cube O'Shea from South Central, the boy who learned to duck sirens before he learned to spell future, felt the old chill. The quiet that comes right before a door you once kicked open gets bricked up again. A security cam blinks. An empty loading bay after midnight. A studio engineer swears the track list vanished from the server, like it never existed. A label exec smiles without his eyes. A blogger posts a think piece about aging relevance. His mother's voice, years ago, sneaks back through the noise. "Keep your head, son," the city answers with helicopters. Here's what they don't put in the press release. The first time he bled onto paper, it was for someone nobody wrote about. Here's what the FBI letter never predicted. That a kid who weaponized verbs would grow up to choose silence when it protected the people he loved. Here's what the charts can't measure. The cost of being early, the rasp in your throat after you yell a truth loud enough to change the decade. A journalist flips through clippings. NWA in black and white. A Xeroxed warning about fuck the police. A casting call for a film that would outlive the summer. Boys and the Hood. In a bar across town, an old speaker coughs out, "It was a good day," and someone raises a glass like a flare. In a classroom, a kid scribbles couplets in the margins, trying to turn hunger into meter, fear into rhyme. He doesn't know it yet, but he's borrowing a fire cube lit 30 years ago. Betrayed, banned, buried alive by bureaucracy, or something stranger, punished for touching the wires you're not supposed to see. Either way, a door is closing, and a hand scarred, steady reaches for it one more time. Some stories dim when the lights go on. This one burns brighter in the dark. Los Angeles, late 1980 seconds. Palm trees casting long shadows over broken glass. The city glittered, but the ground hummed with unrest. The same freeways that carried white convertibles to Beverly Hills carried body bags from Compton to the morgue. Beneath the billboards selling dreams, South Central was still fighting to wake up. O'Shea Jackson Ice Cube grew up watching two Americas, sharing one zip code. Inside his mother's tidy home, there was order. Folded shirts, quiet dinners, curfews that meant survival. Outside, the smell of asphalt after rain and the slow pulse of violence told another story. The news only came when a riot broke out, but Cube lived it every day, the unspoken law of who gets stopped, who gets blamed, who doesn't make it home. He didn't need to read Baldwin to understand the rage of a caged generation. He was living it. When Cube began to write, his verses were not art, they were testimony. He was the neighborhood's court reporter, writing down everything the system refused to hear. His words were ugly, honest, and necessary. And when Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, MC Ren, and DJ Yella came together, those verses became something else. Soundtracks for survival. The world would call it gangster rap. To them, it was just truth with a beat. Straight Outta Compton wasn't supposed to explode, but it did. Suddenly, middle-class America was listening to things it had spent decades pretending didn't exist. Racial profiling, police brutality, the machinery of poverty. And when the FBI sent that infamous letter warning NWA to watch their language, Ice Cube smiled. Because fear was proof that someone was finally listening. He didn't rap for applause. He rapped to breathe. Yet fame came anyway, barreling through the front door like a SWAT team. Concerts sold out. Magazines printed his glare on glossy covers. White teenagers in the suburbs mouthed lyrics about streets they would never walk. America commodified rebellion. Cube knew it wouldn't last. Behind the success, cracks were forming. Money started whispering louder than principle. Contracts became cages. The same men who once fought together for truth now fought over percentages. Cube, the conscience of NWA, saw it coming. When his royalty check came back light, he didn't shout. He walked out, alone. The press called it arrogance. Some called it betrayal. But for Cube, it was survival, the same instinct that once made him cross the street when headlights slowed down. He had built his name on truth, and truth doesn't split royalties. He left NWA with nothing but a pen, a notebook, and rage. Then came America KKKA's Most Wanted, not just an album, but an act of war. A sonic Molotov cocktail hurled at hypocrisy. The media didn't know how to handle it. Too smart to dismiss, too dangerous to embrace. Critics feared it. Communities played it loud enough to crack windows. Every lyric was a punchline to a joke America didn't realize it had told on itself. But fame is a double-edged mic. Every time Cube spoke, more cameras appeared. Every protest he ignited was followed by a meeting in a White Office, where executives smiled and said, "You're doing great, kid, just tone it down." The same industry that profited from his fury now asked him to make it palatable. And that was the beginning of the slow suffocation, fame replacing fire, sponsorships replacing subversion, applause replacing honesty. Yet Ice Cube never became a puppet. He learned to navigate the machine without letting it eat him. While others drowned in fame, Cube built something sturdier, a legacy. He didn't just make music, he made meaning. He turned pain into policy, rhythm into resistance. Decades later, when journalists asked why his lyrics still hit like gunfire, he said simply, "Because the truth don't expire." The man who once screamed through police sirens now speaks with calm precision. Same fire, different flame. But behind that composure lies a story that cameras never caught: the betrayal, the blacklisting, the quiet erasure of a voice that once terrified the powerful. The system he once exposed has evolved, learned to silence not by violence, but by invisibility. Not through bullets, but contracts. And now, in the twilight of his career, Cube faces the same question he wrote about as a teenager. How much truth can you speak before they stop letting you speak at all? And this time, the silence might not come from fear, but from choice. By the early 1990 seconds, Ice Cube wasn't just an artist. He was a movement. The voice of a generation too loud to be ignored, too dangerous to be understood. Every verse he wrote carried the weight of every unspoken name on the streets, those whose stories never made it to the headlines. When he performed "It Was a Good Day," people didn't just nod their heads, they felt the miracle of surviving another sunrise. But fame is a strange kind of storm. It doesn't just lift you up, it tests how long you can stand before it blows you away. Hollywood began knocking. At first, Cube resisted. To him, the camera was just another stage where people pretended. But when John Singleton called, something felt different. Boys in the Hood wasn't fantasy, it was prophecy. Cube didn't act, he relived. When Doughboy said, "Either they don't know, don't show, or don't care what's going on in the hood," America didn't realize that line wasn't written. It was remembered. The film hit like a confession too raw to deny. Critics called it a masterpiece. Cube called it a mirror. He saw his own reflection in every frame. The broken homes, the empty lots, the boys too young to die and too angry to live. The applause felt hollow, because applause doesn't resurrect anyone. With Boys in the Hood, Cube crossed over, but crossing over has a price. He entered boardrooms where the air was colder, the smiles sharper. Executives who once called him dangerous now called him marketable. They didn't want his truth. They wanted his brand. A sanitized version of rebellion, safe enough for profit, edgy enough for ratings. That's when the contracts started coming with fine print. A partnership that quietly meant surrender. A clause that politely said, "Don't bite the hand that feeds you, even if it once cuffed you." Cube read every line. He signed some, he rejected others. He built Cube Vision, his own production company, to control his narrative before someone else sold it. But Hollywood doesn't like stories it can't rewrite. And so began the invisible war, one not fought with bullets or words, but with silence. The whispers started small. A canceled interview here, a lost invitation there. Radio stations suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Certain networks stopped returning calls. Someone high up had decided that Cube's truth was bad for business. And in the business of entertainment, silence spreads faster than scandal. He didn't crumble. He adapted. He shifted gears from the mic to the camera, from the streets to the screen. Comedy, family films, television. Each role another step away from the man who once shouted, "Burn it down." But behind every smile in Friday or every joke in Barbershop was the same mind. Watching, waiting, measuring. He had learned how to survive by blending in, but survival came with guilt. Because somewhere out there, the kids of South Central were still dying, still rapping, still waiting for another Cube to speak up. And the question kept haunting him. When you stop shouting, do you also stop fighting? People around him noticed the change. Friends said he'd grown quieter. Journalists said he'd gone soft. But the truth was more complicated. Cube wasn't silent because he was scared. He was silent because he learned the system's new rule. When truth becomes profitable, They'll let you talk until they've taken everything from you. And then came the breaking point. In 2023, during a heated interview, Cube finally cracked open a truth he'd been holding for years. He spoke about being banned quietly, about losing deals because he refused to bend the knee to industry agendas. He didn't name names, but he didn't need to. Everyone in the room felt the tremor. That kind of honesty doesn't echo, it detonates. Within weeks, sponsors backed out. A planned tour disappeared from streaming platforms. One network announced program restructuring, removing Cube's upcoming project with no explanation. The internet exploded with theories. Some blamed politics. Others called it censorship. But those who knew the industry knew better. This was retaliation, wrapped in bureaucracy. The man who once made America listen was now being erased, one algorithm at a time. And for the first time since he was a boy in South Central, Cube found himself back at square one, uninvited, unbroadcasted, unseen. But that's when he remembered something his father used to say: "You can't kill a man who already learned to live without permission." So he picked up the pen again, not for a chart, not for a paycheck, but because silence had gone on long enough. New lyrics began to form, not just about police, but about power itself. Not about survival, but about integrity. He wrote about fake freedom, corporate chains, and the loneliness of being real in a world addicted to image. And when he finished, he didn't release the track. He kept it, because sometimes the act of creation is resistance enough. Ice Cube didn't fade. He evolved. He became what the system fears most: a man who doesn't need it anymore. By the time the tabloids called it a decline, he was already 2 steps ahead, producing, mentoring, and watching the next generation rap through microphones he once built for them. He no longer shouted to be heard. He spoke to remind. And the greatest tragedy of all? Not that he was silenced, but that the world got quieter without realizing he had stopped talking. Because when the voice of truth learns to whisper, the lies get louder. The headline said retired. The industry called it irrelevant. But those who truly understood knew better. Ice Cube hadn't gone quiet because he'd lost his voice. He'd gone quiet because the echo had gotten too loud. Silence became his armor. When the interviews dried up and the phone stopped ringing, Cube didn't chase the noise. He built a fortress out of it. Inside that silence, he began to see the machine for what it was: polished, predatory, and patient. It didn't destroy rebels anymore. It absorbed them. It fed them money, then guilt, then emptiness. And when they were hollow enough, it sold their image back to the public like nostalgia in a box. But Ice Cube couldn't be packaged. His voice was too raw, his history too real. He'd spent a lifetime breaking patterns, not becoming one. The truth is, Hollywood never forgives independence. You can shout against the police, against the system, against inequality. But the moment you shout against the industry itself, you step into forbidden territory. And Cube did exactly that. He refused the vaccines they demanded on set, declined brand deals that came with moral clauses, turned down scripts that wanted him to play the clown version of himself. Each no cost him another bridge. Each silence made him harder to find. And yet, there he was, unbothered, filming independently, producing documentaries about the forgotten corners of America, visiting schools that the city council had long given up on, teaching kids how to hold a mic, not a weapon. When a reporter asked why he wasn't chasing fame anymore, Cube smiled. Fame's just noise with better lighting. But the machine wasn't done with him. It had subtler ways to punish defiance. A producer's email that never arrived. It is a sauna while one abraded. A sponsor that suddenly restructured their priorities. An entire streaming deal that dissolved overnight. By the time he realized how deep the purge ran, even his closest collaborators were backing away. Not out of betrayal, but fear. In this business, silence is contagious. And so, he learned to weaponize it. He began releasing projects quietly, films funded by his own money, music uploaded without a label. No press releases, no campaigns, no PR stunts. Just truth, raw and unfiltered. They didn't top charts, but they traveled underground, viral, unstoppable, shared by word of mouth, whispered across forums, posted by fans who still remembered the fire of America KKK as most wanted. Each upload was a rebellion in disguise. Every lyric was a reminder. You can erase a man, but not his message. The public thought he had mellowed, but inside that calm was thunder waiting to strike. Cube's silence wasn't surrender, it was aim. He had turned quiet into precision. People around him described it like this. He no longer argued. He waited. He no longer shouted. He observed. He no longer needed the world's attention. He wanted its conscience. Sometimes he'd sit in his backyard in Los Angeles, watching the sky glow orange over the city that raised and scarred him. His wife, Kimberly, would step out, hand him tea, and remind him, "You already did more than anyone expected." He'd nod, but inside, the question burned. What's the use of surviving if you stop shaking the walls? It's a strange thing about legends, they never really disappear. They just start speaking in other languages. Cube's language became mentorship. He began appearing at youth centers, giving talks about self-ownership, about contracts, about not letting anyone own your name. No reporters, no cameras, just truth, he told them. The industry loves rebels until rebels stop making money. And then he added, but you can still rebel quietly. Every choice you make is a verse. Write it right. Meanwhile, Hollywood continued pretending he'd retired. That's how it deals with those it can't control it, buries them under silence and calls it peace. But there were still moments when that silence cracked. Like when his old verses resurfaced on TikTok, played by kids too young to know the original fight. Or when his lyrics trended after another headline about police brutality. Every time, the internet rediscovered what the system had tried to erase. That Ice Cube wasn't a phase. He was a warning. Then came the podcast, his only long interview in years. Cube spoke softly, but every word landed like a hammer. He talked about betrayal, manipulation, and how an artist can die long before their heart stops. And then he said something that froze the room. They think silence means they won, but silence is when I reload. For days, that quote spread across the web, clipped, remixed, repeated. It wasn't anger anymore, it was philosophy. The realization that rebellion doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes. Because silence, in the hands of a man who once made noise into history, becomes the purest sound of defiance. In the end, the world that once tried to muzzle Ice Cube only made him sharper. They took his microphone. He built his own stage. They closed their doors. He opened his own school. They tried to erase his past. He turned it into legacy. Now, when fans see him, they still shout the old lyrics, nostalgia, laughter, pride. But what they don't see is the quiet fire still burning behind his eyes. A fire that doesn't seek to destroy anymore, only to illuminate. A fire that says, you can silence a man, but you can't silence meaning, because some revolutions end not with an explosion, but with a whisper that never fades. There's a strange peace that comes to men who have already burned through everything: anger, fame, and fear alike. Ice Cube reached that peace not by surrender, but by exhaustion. When you fought the system for 3 decades and lived to tell about it, you no longer need to raise your voice. The world itself begins to echo you. Now, when Cube walks through Los Angeles, there's no entourage, no bodyguards, no flashbulbs, just a man in a plain cap, moving through the same streets that once held his nightmares. The city has changed, but its ghosts haven't. Murals of rappers lost too young. Cover the walls, Nipsey, Pac, Eazy-E. Cube pauses sometimes, looks at those faces, and doesn't say a word. He doesn't need to. He outlived the era that tried to consume him. But every victory has its price. The loneliness of being the last torch still burning when everyone else's light has gone out. In the public eye, his story is simple. Rapper, actor, producer, legend. But that's the clean version, the one you can print. The truth is rougher. The truth is that Cube lived in constant battle with the reflection of himself, the man the world made, and the man he really was. To the audience, he was rebellion. To his children, he was discipline. To his wife, he was quiet steadiness. And somewhere between those roles lived the real O'Shea Jackson, still trying to reconcile them all. When the noise of the world fades, he writes again. Not lyrics this time, thoughts. Unreleased, unpolished. Sentences about life, power, and art. They sell rebellion like soda, one note reads. Then act surprised when it stops being refreshing. Another says, silence isn't peace, it's just the sound right before you build again. In his home studio, there's a single framed photo, not of a concert, not of a movie set, but of his mother Doris standing by the kitchen window. She's smiling faintly, but her eyes carry the fatigue of someone who fought the world just to raise a child who could stand upright in it. Underneath the frame, in faded ink, Cube once wrote, "You taught me to survive the noise. I just turned it into music." That's his legacy. Not the platinum records or the box office numbers, but the lineage of strength passed down through sound. Every young rapper who dares to speak truth to power, even on a phone camera, even with shaky rhythm, owes a sliver of that courage to the kid from South Central who first made America flinch. The industry still tiptoes around his name. He's too respected to erase, too unpredictable to fully embrace. Yet his presence is everywhere. You hear it in Kendrick Lamar's defiance, in J. Cole's restraint, in the way hip-hop now expects its poets to also be philosophers. The genre grew up because Cube did. And then there's the silence, the new fire. That quiet way he moves now, the way he answers questions with riddles and refuses to chase approval. It unsettles people. They mistake calm for weakness. They mistake dignity for retreat. But Ice Cube's silence isn't a closed door. It's a mirror. It forces the world to listen to itself. When asked what success means to him now, he simply said, "Waking up and knowing I don't owe anybody my soul." No Grammy, no Oscar, no billion-dollar deal can buy that kind of peace. Because in the end, the goal was never fame. It was freedom. And freedom, he learned, doesn't roar. It hums. His sons now make music too proud, confident, independent. They carry his cadence but not his rage. Cube watches them with both pride and nostalgia. He knows they're lucky to live in a world he helped reshape, one where they don't have to scream to be heard. And yet, he wonders, will they understand the cost of that quiet? Will they know what it took to carve out that space for them to breathe? Sometimes in interviews, he slips not in words, but in his eyes. There's a faraway look, like he's still hearing an echo from those early days. The sound of police sirens, the scratch of pen on paper, his sister's name whispered in grief. He never writes about her anymore, but she's still there, hidden in every verse that ever mattered. The fire started with her. And maybe it still burns because of her. In a documentary filmed a few years ago, Cube stood in front of his childhood home. The paint was peeling, the yard overgrown. He stared at it for a long time before saying quietly, "This house taught me that silence can scream louder than bullets." Then he smiled that half smile that means he's already somewhere else in his thoughts, and walked away without looking back. Maybe that's the lesson he's leaving behind. That art isn't about noise or fame or being remembered. It's about outlasting the lie. And Ice Cube, against all odds, did. Because in a world built to silence him, he learned how to make silence speak. And in that stillness, beneath the weight of everything he's lived through, the fire keeps burning not to destroy anymore, but to light the way. Some fires never fade. They just stop needing permission to burn.